Mr. Harris, thank you for allowing me to be here. This is incredible.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate your interest in what we do.
Yeah, it's been a couple years since I heard of y'all, and if you had asked me 2 years ago when I ordered my first liver from you, if I was going to be sitting down with you in your office in Bluffton, I probably would have told you you're crazy.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit surreal for me, honestly. And we just drove around White Oak Pastures for about an hour, looked at your pasture and your ranch and your farm and what you're building here in Bluffton. And I want to thank you, first off, because as a young man, I'm 24, it's places like this that, number one, inspire me, but they also give me hope in our system as a whole, because I'm very much so concerned about the health in America and America as a whole. But people like yourselves and your family and the people of Bluffton, the people of White Oak Pastures they give me hope. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you and I appreciate your interest. And, it doesn't matter how committed we producers are to changing the way we produce food in this country. If consumers don't buy into it, it'll be a non-event.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, that's actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, you kind of just touched on it. As a 24-year-old guy, I'm not a farmer. I'm not a rancher. At some point it is a goal of mine to have land that I live on and live with. But what can I do like to help America's food system go forward? You kind of just mentioned, but like, other than just buying and supporting ranchers, is there anything that I can do?
Well, I appreciate your passionate interest. And I do hope that you do decide to buy land and develop it and maintain it and make it restart the cycles of nature, which is something we talk about a lot. But as far as the movement itself, really, we need more farmers to embrace it. And for that to happen, we need to be able to, for these farmers to be able to afford it. And to afford it, they need customers. So it's really very simple, but very difficult. The simple part is just find yourself a good regenerative farmer and find out what they do and be sure you like their practices and support them. The hard part is finding that guy or gal and developing that relationship. It's not as easy as the brochure said. And and one thing that I would warn you about is you can't believe what's written on the label. You just can't.
Yeah.
Sadly, you're going to have to go to some trouble to find that person that you want to support that's doing the right things by the animal and by the land and by the rural community. And,
yeah.
And they're not that many, sadly.
Well, I think maybe you mentioned it in your book, A Bold Return to Giving a Damn, which is a phenomenal book. I want to congratulate you on that as well. But I think you mentioned it maybe in 1920, 40% of the American population was farmer. And now what is it, 1%?
Yeah, I think it's probably about 1%. And that 1% mostly farms industrially. And I think it's probably 1% of the 1% that are farming in a manner that is really good for the land and the animal.
How would you talk a lot about greenwashing and just like the organic, grass-fed, regenerative. How would you describe the way that you run White Oak Pastures? Like, what's the word or the phrase that you would use?
Well, that's been a moving target because they keep taking the words away from us. Every time we come up with a concept of this is what we're doing verbally, big food starts to use it. That goes from organic to sustainable to humane to, most recently it's regenerative. But so I don't know that it can be done in a word. So really what you as a consumer are looking for is a producer like me who, and not necessarily just me, but somebody like us who is respecting and restarting the cycles of nature. That's what this is about. The cycles of nature are, to name a few, the energy cycle, the water cycle, the microbial cycle, carbon cycle, on and on, many cycles of nature. Some of them we probably don't even recognize. But if you are farming what I now call regenerative way, you are restarting those cycles of nature. The very linear, reductive style of farming that feeds 90-something% of us breaks the cycle, intentionally breaks the cycles of nature to make it linear. This is a very cyclical functionality that we're in. And keeping those cycles cycling and functioning is the key to it.
And you kind of touched on this earlier, but so if 1% of America's farm or population is farmers, and you mentioned obviously the vast majority of that is factory industrial farming, what's the number one barrier for those folks, or like maybe even yourself? What was the barrier for you before you made this switch? Like why would every farmer not be like, you know what, this is the best way to do it, this is how I'm going to do it?
There are a number of difficulties, but the only real barrier is being able to market your product at a profit. When the industrial system that feeds us casts off cost. We're killing the life in the Gulf of Mexico, but the pesticide companies and the farmers who are using them aren't paying for that.
It's not a monetary cost, or it's at least not like calculated in the actual price.
It'll be paid for by someone else, and the someone else is society. We're on and on. We can list them, global warming and climate change and all these things that are partially the result of industrial farming is being paid for by someone other than the industrial farmers and the pesticide, pharmaceutical, commodity companies that are profiting from it.
Yeah.
So what has to happen is that more people have got to farm in a manner that respects the land, the animals, the rural community, and to do that they need customers. It's incredibly hard to find enough customers to pay enough of a premium for farmers like me to operate. The fact is, we think we cover our externalized costs. If I'm not, I don't know what they are. I'm not. And so as a result, I have to sell my product for a little bit more than that commodity producer that is casting off costs.
Yeah, I remember you saying something along the lines of like the cost of chicken per pound is maybe $1.99, but the real, like, or maybe that's the price, but the cost is actually like $4 or something. $4 or something like that. You said something along those lines, and I think what you're getting at is exactly what you're talking about with the Gulf of Mexico being harmed. That's a price that none of these companies are actually paying right now. Somebody's gonna have to pay it.
Species being driven into extinction is another one.
Which is brutal.
There are dozens and dozens of negative unintended consequences that are occurring that nobody wants to see it happen, but there are companies that are profiting from it.
Yeah. Let me. Sorry. What was it for you? What was the impetus for you where you made? Because people should go listen to your book or read your book, but you were an industrial farmer for the first part of your career. So what was the change? What was the moment for you where you were like, I need to do something differently?
I guess the incident that occurred that called it to my attention was not what caused it. It's just what called it to my attention. So I can remember one day in the fall of 1995, we were loading out a load of cattle to be shipped to the Midwest. I don't remember exactly where we were going with them, but we loaded a load of 100 500-pound calves on a double-decker truck. And on those double-decker trucks, the ones on top are urinating and defecating on the ones on the bottom.
Wow.
And they'll be on that truck from the time it takes to get to Bluffton, Georgia, to Nebraska or wherever they were going. I think it was Nebraska, actually, but I don't remember. but that's like a 30-hour drive.
With
And
pee
they'd
and
be
poop
on,
and all this.
they'd be on that truck without food or water or rest, urinating and defecating. And I had done that dozens of times, and it didn't bother me a bit. But for some reason that day, I said, it's not right. And it caused me to really take a look at the animal welfare side of what I was doing, which I thought was great. I thought, as my peers thought, as my dad thought, as the instructors I had at the University of Georgia Animal Science School thought, that if the animals were given plenty to eat, plenty to drink, kept in a comfortable temperature range, and not intentionally had pain inflicted upon them, that's fine. That's good animal welfare. But that's not, it's more than that. Those animals need to express instinctive behavior. Cows need to roam and graze, hogs need to root and wallow, poultry need to scratch and peck, and the industrial model does not allow for that. So I suddenly just became very unhappy with my animal welfare that I would have told you a couple of months before is fine. It's just fine. You're foolish if you don't think this is fine. So,
because that's what you've been led to believe. Like
that's all I'd ever heard. And said, where I was raised, my dad was a fantastic cattle guy, but he's very industrial. And very quickly after that animal welfare niche coin dropped, I guess, the environmental side just became glaringly obvious to me. I can remember looking at the soil that I was tilling, using a lot of chemical fertilizer, a lot of pesticides on. It was just a dead mineral medium. And just a few feet over there in the edge of the forest, it was a teeming with life. A medium was just teeming with life. You could see some of it you could see, most of it you couldn't see, but it was all alive. And one was dry and dusty, and the other one was moist and smelled very different. So I decided that was just as important. So I started really moving my operation very, very quickly from what it was into more like what it is today. It's taken a while. And along the what's important to me now about the rural economy was not apparent at the time. Those two coins dropped back to back. But I didn't really think that there was anything I could do about the impoverishment of my local rural community. I could see it, and I was aware of it, and I wasn't happy about it. But it was a way of life, and it had been happening for 50 years. And just a slow economic decline.
Well, and you mentioned earlier that Clay County was the poorest county in America.
In 2020, Clay County, Georgia, where we're sitting right now, where most of my farm is, it was the poorest county in the United States of America. You can look it up. So, and that's just the way it was. And I knew damn well there was nothing I could do about it. Just a force of nature. But one day, a guy was visiting me, and he looked up and said, "This is a nice little town." And it surprised me. And I looked up and said, this is kind of a nice little town. And it wasn't as nice as it is today, but the changes we'd made in the way we raise our animals and treat our land had changed the town. We had added a lot more services, doing a lot more things for ourselves, hiring a lot more people to make all that happen. And that money that was being kept in this economy, instead of being mainlined to Silicon Valley or Wall Street and some CEO, and it was a lot of them staying here. I think you can look it up, but I think that last figures I saw was something like 17 cents of every dollar goes to the farmer, of every food dollar goes to the farmer. The rest of it's taken up along the way. And here, if I sell direct online, 100 cents of it stays with the farmer. Now, that doesn't mean I am incredibly profitable. We're not. We are very break-even-ish, despite the fact that we've got a lot of equity. And despite the fact we've been doing this a long time and are pretty good at it, we're very break-even-ish. And that's okay. And even getting 100 cents of every dollar. But it's because the money stays here locally. My payroll is $100,000 a week. In the poorest county in America,
Wow.
my payroll is $100,000 a week. We're the largest private employer in the county. And I can go on, but other places that the money goes, but it benefits this local rural economy instead of being part of the industrial food production system the way that most folks eat.
Sure. And I mean, we just drove around. You have processing plants here. You have landscape. You have carpentry. You have a general store. All these things that would otherwise be like the processing is a perfect example. You ship those cows to somewhere else so that they get processed there by some huge plant. That's all happening here now, which means you're incurring that cost, but that also means that you get to keep more of the dollar of that dollar that you're talking about.
So you're exactly right, and if what my critics would say is, well, that's not a very efficient model, and they are right. Food that I produce costs more than food that's produced in the industrial model. Just is. It's because we internalize those costs that they externalize, but they want to measure me only in efficiency. And efficiency is something that, in fact, it's all they're good at. It's the only thing they're good at. Since World War II, we have done nothing. We as an industry have done nothing but make food production increasingly efficient. Take cost out, take cost out, take cost out. And I get that. I understand it. I'm not adverse to efficiency, but efficiency and resiliency are like yin and yang. And the more efficient something is, probably the less resilient it is. You can build a tower 1 mile and 2 miles and 5 miles high, but it's not more and more stable. And so efficiency is how high you make it. Resilient is how long you can keep it up there.
Yeah, and there's only so long of a time horizon that something can maintain that efficiency before its lack of resiliency causes it to come crumbling down.
Exactly, and I think we're there. Now, I don't know that, but I think that we have used incredible, powerful technology to make our food production system more and more and more efficient since World War II, 65 years or something. And we have moved that ball so far down the field. It's incredible. But there's a breaking point, and or a number of breaking points. And maybe that breaking point is avian influenza. Maybe it's diminished resources. There's only so much potassium and phosphate in the ground.
Yeah.
There's only, I would assume there's only so much pesticide and nitrogen you can put in the water. I assume there's only so much water in the earth that you can pump out for irrigation. And we go on and on about that. One of the things that plagues me most is the extinction of species. I certainly can't debate this, but my belief, I am a naturalist, and I believe that every species that's indigenous to a ecosystem has a function there, a role there.
Is that what you mean by naturalist? What do you mean by naturalist?
A naturalist, a person who is focused on nature.
Okay, gotcha.
I believe that every ecosystem has indigenous species that have a role there.
If they're there for a reason.
If they're there for a reason. They have a functionality that they have evolved into. And we may not see it You know, we have mosquitoes and flies that I hate them, but I don't want to kill all of them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what their functionality is, but I believe they got one.
Yeah. That's actually a pretty popular question. Like, why did God make mosquitoes? For some reason, I don't know why.
I'm betting there's a role there.
Yeah.
I'm betting that something in evolution. You know, so I graduated from the University of Georgia in 1976. I took a lot of soils classes, and we talked a lot about soil consistency, soil fertility, soil textures. We never talked about soil biology, the microbiology in the soil. You hear something about it now, but back then that was just not. And you know, nobody said this, but kind of the assumption is that it's bad. We'd be better off without it.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be better off if the soil was sterile. And millions and millions of dollars of soil sterilant are produced today.
And that's a sunk cost if everybody changes to what you're doing, and businesses don't want that.
It's a product that won't sell anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. So, I mean, when we were driving around, you have your property that's managed the way that you manage it, quite literally surrounding monocrop agriculture, which is indicative of the fact that this community is not all managed the same way that you are, or that your farm and ranch is.
Right.
My question is, when you first made that switch, like this is a small, tight-knit community. So I'm sure people, when you said, you know what, I'm going to change something, did you get backlash from people around you? Did people call you crazy?
Yeah, backlash is not the right word. I don't think anybody got mad. But, you know, I think that people probably thought that was crazy. And they were kind of right. I mean, you know, we put a lot of time and effort and money into this change that we made, and you know, it has not had a super lucrative return. I'm glad we did it. I have no second thoughts about whether or not that was the right thing to do. I had 2 daughters that came back here, and I've had 5 children who are now my grandchildren on the farm. And
do you think they would have came back if you were running it the other way?
I'm positive they would not. They were not raised to be industrial farmers.
What does that mean to you? Like having like the decision you made, as risky as it was, meaning like your family came back. That's
the best single part of it. It's not the only good part of it, but having that continuity. You know, I'm the 4th generation of my family on this farm. They are the 5th, and if one or more of their babies comes back, it'll be the 6th. So that's all very, very good.
And by that time, it'll probably be like 200 years.
It would be 200 years.
Which is pretty incredible.
Almost 160 now. So, but it's I don't know. I lost my train of thought.
That's all right. One thing that I've heard you talk about a lot, and you actually just mentioned it. So while you were at UGA, which is an agricultural land grant school in Georgia, very old school, you started your degree, it was called animal husbandry, and then it switched to animal science?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm right. I'm pretty sure that when I went there in 1972, it was animal husbandry.
Well, either way, regardless of whether or not that's actually what it's called, what's the difference between the two?
Oh, a lot. A lot.
For the uninitiated like myself.
Yeah, well, let me there's a lot of difference. I don't know if I've ever been asked the question, but okay, I got it for you. I think that I'll take it to something that I'm really comfortable with, is that science is a very linear approach. You know, it's you would as opposed to a cyclical approach. Husbandry would be a very cyclical approach. A linear approach, science, lends itself to scale. And it makes a lot of assumptions about things being the same in different circumstances.
Like repeatability.
Yeah, and it's more educatable. I mean, you can in a cyclical endeavor, you do it differently here or 15 miles away. If you notice, land grant university professors got a resume that they were in Georgia for 5 years, and then in Hawaii for 5 years, and then in Maine for 5 years, and then Iowa. They move around a lot. That's kind of part of the merit badges they get as they climb their way into being full professors. And so there needs to be some consistency in soils. That's a discipline. Soils. Entomology is a discipline. Bacterial. All the little disciplines need to be somewhat similar, because I may be in a different I will be in a different ecosystem later on in my career. The very cyclical way we farm it would be very hard to teach in an academic environment.
How would you teach it then? Like bringing people here?
Yeah, we have an intern. Good. How you do it? That's a good question. So we have an internship program, and it's very popular. We can only we take 6 or 7 interns 4 times a year for 3 months, and we get 20-something applications for every slot we got. So I'm not trying to build that program. We and further, I'm not trying to build a program. Is I tell these interns, where do you hope to farm? If you plan to farm in the Pacific Northwest, this is not where you should intern. If it's the Northeast or Midwest, you should be as nearly in the ecosystem that you hope to operate in as you can. That doesn't mean you can't move around, and people do that, and I support that. But farming in different ecosystems manifests itself in many different ways, and the linear science behind it does not support that very well.
Like your exact philosophy and the practices that you have wouldn't work. Like it just wouldn't work in South Dakota. Or
I think about it all the time, and it's interesting you mentioned South Dakota, because my best friend is a guy named Gabe Brown, who wrote a book called Dirt to Soil. He's very good at this, and I've been to visit his ranch. And the whole time I was on his, and I think I'm a really good operator in the coastal plains of Georgia.
Yep.
The whole time I was riding with Gabe on his ranch, I was thinking, I would not know how to start. And it doesn't have to be from Georgia to South Dakota. It could be from, actually he's in North Dakota, but it doesn't have to be that far. If it's, ecosystems change.
North Georgia, the mountainous North Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, you can go 30 miles and be in a different ecosystem. Maybe similar, but things change very quickly. Elevation from here to the Chattahoochee River, it's about a 200-foot drop, and it's different. Not to say I couldn't farm there. Yeah. I could, but a lot of what works really well for me here will be a little different for me over there.
Yeah, you mentioned you wouldn't know where to start at his ranch in North Dakota. Where did you start here? Like when you just, on that day in the fall of 95, I guess it was, when you saw those cattle being loaded up and you made that decision, what was the first step that you took?
That's a good question. And the answer is there was not a lot of resolve about what I was going to do. There was a lot of resolve about what I'm not going to do anymore. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to do that anymore. And many of the things from using antibiotics, subtherapeutic antibiotics, to feeding unnatural feedstuffs, to confinement, on and on, were things I said, I'm not going to do that anymore.
There's a Matthew McConaughey. Are you familiar with him?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he has a book called Green Lights, and in that book he talks about the idea of one of the best ways to find out who you are is to first figure out who you're not. So it's kind of that same way where you might not have known exactly where the hell you were going, but you at least said, I know where I'm not going. Okay?
Well, I never read that, but that's exactly what happened with me. I didn't decide that day I'm going to do it, how I'm going to do it different. I said, I'm going to do it different. I started changing things and mostly cutting out things, cutting out the industrial tools that I had embraced.
That's incredible. I think you mentioned this on your first episode with Joe Rogan, but the idea of biomimicry, that's a very esoteric thing. Like not a lot of people are familiar with biomimicry. Do you want to like how has that played a role in how you operate White Oak Pastures?
But biomimicry sets the stage for how you run your farm. You need to study the natural systems in your ecosystem, not somebody else's. And you need to emulate them as best you can. And you need to know up front that your emulation will not be perfect. Our emulation of nature is far from perfect. And I accept it because I can't make it perfect. You know, we use like rotational grazing, moving the animals, moving our cattle, say from field to field, paddock to paddock, every single day.
365 days a year.
Well, no, almost. Our growing season for the warm season grasses is usually from April to September.
Okay.
And then our cool season grasses is from February to April. So during that December, January, maybe a little February, we don't rotate them. We stop.
Sorry, I interrupted your train of thought.
Yeah, no, we'll go back to it or not.
You were talking about biomimicry and how biomimicry is literally mimicking life. So like the idea that we can learn from. Come here.
Hey, we're doing a podcast.
Oh my God.
Okay, thank you.
Do you get that a lot?
Yeah.
People just come and say hello?
They had a book I didn't want to sign, but we got to go.
Yeah. Does that make you, is that gratifying to you that somebody would come out of their way to try?
It's a little bit, I mean, I think it's very nice, a little embarrassing. I mean, it makes it pleases me that this sort of agricultural production is catching traction a little bit, enough for those people to come here. But I really just rather them just read the book, and
Yeah.
it's not going to be any better if I write my name on it.
Yeah, that's a good
I'll do it. I'm happy to do it, and
Yeah.
I don't mind doing it. And I'm honored they would want me to.
Sure.
But that's
a good point. One of the things that I remember, one of the first things I ever heard you say or talk about was the idea that you didn't want to feed the whole country. Like you don't want to feed people in California or New York. You want ranches like yours in those areas to feed those people. Like, what's your ideology behind that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. And I that you're right. But when I say I don't want to, I mean I can't. And the reason is because the industrial food production system that feeds us is super industrialized and super commoditized. And it lends itself to scale very, very easily. That's what we do. This kind of farming is not highly scalable. It is highly replicatable. It'll produce an incredible amount of food. I almost said as much food as we want. Well, I don't know about that, but it's incredible how much food can be produced. But it's not highly scalable. There won't be 8 food companies feeding the planet. There'll be a food in a perfect world, a food provider in every market, every town or county, or I don't know exactly how that's going to look. And people have asked me, and I don't know what happens in cities like San Diego and New York City, and I don't know how that works. I don't have the answer to all of the distribution questions that might come up. I'm a farmer, and I really have a great grasp, my understanding of what's wrong with the production model. the distribution, I'm gonna have to have some help. There are other people that know more about that than me, but I do strongly believe that the food production needs to be far more local than it is today. That there's still room for people to bring coffee in from wherever they grow coffee, or oranges in from wherever they grow oranges, but we don't need to have food deserts, sprawling food deserts all over the world, but we do.
And there's whatever the statistic is, I don't know the exact number. I'm not even gonna try to say it, but like the amount of the U.S. food supply that's owned by a very, very small, very small number of companies. That's alarming to me because that's so centralized. Like, what if some decision was made by those companies that was not in the best interest of the millions and millions of people that eat it? Whereas your model, say there's White Oak Pastures here, 2 hours north, there's another farm similar. 2 hours north of that, there's another farm similar. There's this decentralized nature, which allows, like you said, it's not as scalable, but it's more nuanced, it's more local, it's more, if it needs to change, it can. Whereas the big model, it's so hard.
And that scalability, that problem is exacerbated by the fact that it's all focused on efficiency. And as we talked about before, you can make something so efficient that it doesn't have resiliency, and I think we have.
Is there a balance? Like, do you focus on efficiency at all?
We strive to be as efficient as we can, but it's not first, foremost, paramount in every decision we make.
Yeah.
I am not listing efficiency as a vice or a bad thing. We all need to be efficient, but when you make that the only altar you bow down to, there's great risk in that, and that's where we are.
There's a saying, Godspeed is slow. I think that's pretty accurate in terms, at least as it relates to farming and ranching. Like, the efficiency only takes you so far, and it's gonna, like we talked about, that stool is one of the legs is gonna come off that stool, and then everything's gonna come crumbling down. But it sounds like I agree with you if this is your thought, but like, we're in a bad place in our food system in America. Where do we go from here? Like, how do we get out of the bad place that we're in?
I understand your question, and I agree with the way you phrased it. And I don't know the answer. I've been proven wrong. At a point in my travels, my path, I thought I was an early innovator who was helping to lead the way on how we produce food in this country, a change in how we produce food in this country. And I liked that. I didn't think it would make me rich or famous, but I thought it was good. And delighted to be in that position. But it hadn't gone that way so far. I was expecting a tsunami of change, that when people saw that the scaled up industrial model yielded all these harms, that they'd move more towards this way of buying food, the way it was produced. But it hadn't happened that way. So I don't think it'll be a tsunami. Maybe there'll be bubbles. The change. So let me say this. Sadly, at my age, I've come to realize that really nothing brings about change except pain. Now, I'm not happy about that. I'm not an advocate of that's how it ought to be. That's just been my experience. But you don't change much until it starts to hurt. So we have got, at White Oak Pastures, we've got a good group of customers that support us, that we've accumulated over the last 25 years. We're grateful for them. I think they appreciate us. It's a beautiful relationship, but it's not just spreading and spreading and spreading. And I think that it's going to take pain for a larger number of the consuming public to start moving this way. And I'm sorry about that. And I don't know what it's going to look like. I have no idea.
Pain in the way of like health problems, pain in the way of animals getting mistreated, things like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it can be, I think it can be
Financial pain for small
I
communities.
think it can be illness like avian influenza or the flu epidemics, or I think it can be diminished resources, or I think it can be pollution. I think it can be many, many, many things. I'm sure you got listeners that know a lot more about what all can go wrong than I do. But I do think that as a civilization, we have let making food, the idea of making food cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, put us in a position where we're vulnerable to a lot of mishaps.
Yeah, and that's where like myself, the consumer, comes into play. Like I can either make the choice to buy cheaper meat, which is understandable, right? Like to not spend that much money. It's not surprising that people choose that. Or I can make the decision to invest more money now so I don't have to spend it later on somebody like yourself or a regenerative ranch, a ranch that's doing things cyclically. It's going to be more expensive, but it's like there's at what cost are you trying to save $2 per pound?
Yeah, well, you raise an excellent point there. And the way I would say it is that for there to be a change in the way we produce food, you can forget big ag making the change because they're profiting from what we're doing. You can forget big food making the change because they're profiting from what we're doing. You can forget big tech from making the change because they're profiting from what we're doing. You can forget government making the change because they're profiting from those people who are profiting from it. I can go on and on about who is not going to make the change. If there's a change made, it'll be made by consumers. And that's so hard because there are so many people that have so limited resources, and to say I'm going to spend more on my food. You mentioned a minute ago about the health aspect, and I don't talk much about that. I believe it, but I don't talk much about it. But so I'll tell you why first. So when I first started trying to move my customer base to buying the food I was producing, I talked a lot about the health benefit and food safety and nutrient density and all these other things. And then I realized how stupid I sound talking about these things that I have such shallow information. I was just repeating what I heard. So I rethought it. And by then my daughter was back here, and I had her go through our website and remove every accolade I made except as regard to the welfare of the animal, the impact on the environment, and the local economy. Those are things that I am an expert on. And I know them. I know exactly the benefits I have, and I can talk about that with anybody, anywhere. And I don't talk about these other things. I have beliefs about them, but there are too many dietitians and physicians and scientists that can talk about that instead.
Yeah, with more depth than you can. I mean, there's definitely merit to that, I think. And I think I would rather hear you talk about the things that you've spent your life devoted to, because there's so much more depth to that. One of the things that I actually haven't really thought about this until just now. So when you were an industrial farmer, White Oak Pastures had one product, and it was the cattle that you'd ship to whatever processing plant. That's the only thing that came out of White Oak Pastures. Now you guys have every piece of meat, liver, so many different things from every animal. You have so many different types of livestock. You have the leather goods that come from those livestock. You have, I'm drawing like eggs, all these things, all these different animals. that's got to be one of the coolest things to see. You went from one product that you didn't even process to, I don't even know how many products y'all sell on your website. It's got to be hundreds. That's got to be pretty cool to realize.
Well, pretty cool is great. Thank you for saying that. But for me, what it represents is when I was just raising cattle to ship to a feedlot, to ship to a packer, I was in that chain, that huge chain that provided beef for everyone in the world. And I was one little tiny little segment of that chain. And we completely changed that, rethought that, and now we are a chain. It's a tiny little chain, but we are a chain. We go all the way from the animals being born here, raised here, slaughtered here, marketed here, cooked here, and eaten here. In many cases, we got a restaurant. So that's the change, and that also gets back to the conversation we had earlier about being linear versus cyclical. When I was in that when I was just raising calves industrially for that cycle, for that industrial market, that's very linear. And we all occupy a little space in there. And today we own the whole cycle. It's a tiny little cycle.
Yeah.
But we own it all.
Cycle nonetheless, though. And it's very cool. I think it's so cool just even being in Bluffton, seeing the White Oak General Store, the White Oak stickers on like all the cars you see, the White Oak on all the buildings. It really is so cool. And I believe that's how agricultural development was intended. I don't think it was meant to be these like hundreds of thousands of acres farms that don't even feed anybody in the area. They go to some plant that ships that to wherever else. It's just it's so cool to me, especially being from a city. I'm from Atlanta, to come down here and see it's literally this, like you said, it's an entire chain, like the entire community, even from the people that work here. Those are local people that you're impacting, how many people did you have on the farm when you were an industrial farmer in terms of like employees? Four employees. Yeah. And now you have what?
160 or 70.
That's so cool. Yeah. I think that's like one of the most valuable parts of it all.
Well, from the local economy perspective, that's where our contribution is. We're the largest private employer in this county, and payroll's $100,000 a week. And I love the fact that money stays right here in this hyper poor economy. There would be so much more poor if we weren't doing that.
Yeah, there's the irony that like somebody in a rural economy that doesn't have a White Oak around, they're spending less money, they're saving money on the meat, but in fact that entire model is making them more poor over time. Whereas if the shift was made to something like this in their community over time, obviously it's not an easy thing to do. There's the idea of like things being simple, not easy. Like it's very difficult to do, but it is that simple.
I'm not saying there are no wealthy farmers.
Yeah,
that there are, but I don't think it's very disputable that this industrial food production system has been very hard economically on farmers. It has not built a tremendous amount of farm wealth. It's a smaller number of farmers that are doing fairly well with it, but it's not it is not enriched rural America. It is impoverished rural America.
Which is, it's almost hard to even conceptualize that, thinking about like farming, which is a rural thing. It's a country thing to do. It happens in rural America. That's where we farm. It's wild to think that the system that we've built for farming is impoverishing the very communities in which that takes place. It's kind of sad to think about.
Well, I don't know much about mining, but the towns where they dig gold out of the ground may not be very rich. The banks that handle that gold, the mining companies that are in high-rise office buildings is probably where the wealth winds up.
Which is interesting. I think it might, maybe in your book, maybe in your most recent podcast with Joe Rogan, but you talk about you didn't you don't like telling your story. You didn't like telling your story for a while. You didn't like talk about what you were doing, at least like the past of the farm. What compelled you to start talking about what you're doing here at like a broader scale?
Well, when I realized that people wanted to hear it, not everybody wants to hear it, but we were raised cowboy, and you just didn't talk about your personal stuff much. That was the culture. So I didn't. And then when I started farming differently, I found it necessary to talk to people about what we were doing. And was really surprised that some of them wanted to hear it and would ask questions. And it wasn't that I didn't want to talk to them. I just didn't think that it's just a cultural thing. And when I found out that there were people that wanted to hear it, I was delighted to talk to them about it. It still am.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people up till very recently have never really heard anything about it. I for one, didn't really understand. I wasn't even aware of the difference between like regenerative agriculture or what you're doing here at White Oak and Joe Smith's farm in Idaho, or Iowa. I just like didn't understand that there was even a difference.
Well, I would maintain that's not exactly an accident. Every box of cereal or carton of milk that you ever bought or bag of cookies probably had a farm on it, or likely had a farm on it, showing a red barn and a green field and a happy cow and a butterfly, whatever. So I think that big food, big tech has intentionally messaged, and they got people that work for them that are incredibly talented with messaging,
Marketing,
messaging. That's one of the things that makes it so hard for us. Every word that we've ever come up with to favorably describe what we do, they take it away from us.
Yeah.
So it's gone from sustainable to organic to certified organic products now. Vegetables can be grown in a multi-level house,
like vertical farming or whatever.
Vertical farming in water, not in soil, and with fake lights. So there's not. But it's certified organic.
Yeah.
So these things have been taken away from us, one right after the other, and it's just the messaging is very difficult. And these people that are doing the messaging for big food, big ag, big tech are incredibly talented and got a lot of resources.
What do you think about like lab grown meat and stuff like that?
Well, that's a broad subject. As far as what do I think about it as a threat to what I do, I'm not worried about it. The people I sell product to aren't going to go to lab grown meat. A lot. I mean, there may be people that do, but it won't be my customers.
Sure.
If anything, I think it might push more people to me. So I'm not threatened by it in that way. As far as what I think about it as a food for my fellow Americans or fellow earthlings, I have grave concerns about it. And I think that we have continued to synthesize and industrialize and change how we take nutrition in further and further away from a natural environment, a natural diet that we evolved to eat, and more to synthesized foods. I just don't think that's good. It's kind of like that deal about it's not my expertise. I mean, I can't give you data about that, but I have strong feelings about how I think that's going to work out.
Yeah. We pulled up to this courthouse. I don't know how old this building is. Old Clay County courthouse. And I grew up watching like Western movies and like literally every Saturday with my dad. So I've always loved like the old sort of antique aesthetic of buildings and stuff like that. This is like pretty much exactly that. And there's these pictures, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's your great grandfather on on the far left?
That is my great grandfather,
And then
his son, my grandfather, his son, my father, me, the two daughters that came back here. And there's another frame there to see if any grandchildren come back. I've got 5 grandchildren on the farm. I've got another daughter who's not on the farm. She's got 2 children.
very cool. What do you think that your great grandfather would say if he was sitting at this table right now? What do you think he'd tell you?
You know, I didn't know him. I knew my grandfather, but I was very young. Certainly didn't know them well enough to know what they would think, but I believe that they would appreciate the fact that I've brought the farm back to a production system that was way more similar to what they did than it was what my dad and I did. My dad, I used to worry a lot about, what would he say? And my dad had dementia and Alzheimer's and died before my changes became obvious to him, so he didn't know about the change. But I can assure you, he would have, he would not have let it happen when he was in control.
Really? You think you would just stopped at cold turkey? Like,
oh yeah, I know we would.
Why do you think
we
that
never
is?
had a discussion. He was just so entrenched and successful in the industrial beef model. He did well, and would not have believed that there was moving back to a model that was more similar to my great grandfather and grandfather would have been the thing to do. And he may be right. We still don't know. Right at this point, I feel okay, but I'm not. I'm not bristling with confidence that this model I've brought to my family is the right one. I think it is, but it's not. It's not we don't know yet.
Guess we'll find out.
Yeah, and I tell you something's interesting along those lines is when I started changing the farm, I never said I'm going to take this back to what my great granddad and granddaddy did. I never did that. I just started making changes that felt right, and at a point I became aware that, damn, this is a lot more like what my great grandfather and grandfather did than it was like what my dad and I did. And increasingly it's more and more that way. And I want to say this, I'm not anti-technology. There's a system right there behind where you're sitting with 60-something cameras all over the farm that's recording what's happening all over the place. That's technology. I think we were on our 3rd or 4th drone. I had the first drone of anybody around here. We use it a lot. We wear them out.
To monitor herds? Or,
yeah.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm. I can go on and on. We embrace technology, but the use of technology tends to make things linear versus cyclical. And we will not move away from the fact that this is a cyclical business. It's not a linear business. We use technology to the greatest extent we can and embrace it and love it. But it's not, this business is not run through we have an online store. We have spent a pile of money on the systems to run that online store. I don't even know how much. But when they say they need something, we write the check because it's worked for us.
Yeah, it's almost like not making technology being a tool, not your master.
Yeah,
it's like a lot of farms make the technology that they have the master of their farm, as opposed to a tool to accentuate or enhance the practices that you are partaking in here.
I do want to be clear. I'm not anti-technology. I live with my iPhone just like everybody else does.
Yeah, absolutely. You're on a podcast. You got a computer over there. I'm just absolutely fascinated by the fact that, like, one thing you don't see a lot, or at least not me. I'm from a city, like I said. You don't see a lot of people with 6 generations on a property. Like, I'm trying to think about how to phrase that question. But, like, how important was it to you growing up? Was there ever an option that you wouldn't come back to the farm?
Oh yeah. So my dad did not want me to come back and farm. I was born in 1954 and graduated from high school in 1972. And my dad was a very successful farmer and generated a lot of wealth, but never had a lot of money, because that's the way it works in a multi-generational business. You generate a lot of wealth and equity in the operation.
Asset rich, cash poor type deal.
Exactly. And that's where my dad was. And he saw his friends and neighbors and relatives leave the farm and go to town and get a job and get a paycheck every Friday that was liquid and drive an automobile. It just, the appearance to him is they had it made and he had a hard life. And really, I think that probably, I don't know this, but probably my dad accumulated more wealth than they did, but it was not liquid. He was not enjoying it. And he wanted me to go that route. He did not want me to farm. And I should tell you that my dad, it's very unusual. My dad was an only child, born in 1920. I was an only child, born in 1954. That's pretty unusual. So we had a very unique relationship. We were like, and we both personality-wise were very similar. And that's not all good.
Butt heads a little bit.
Yeah, and yeah, we were best friends. We could eat together, drink together, fish together, hunt together. When we started working together, it was nose to nose. And I showed you that cabin. I had to go to the cabin a lot to get out of the house. But I never wanted to do anything but come back and farm. He didn't want me to, but that's all I wanted to do. And
even while you're in college, like even while you,
I majored in science. Yeah.
Well, didn't you get a job right after?
I did, because he wouldn't let me come back. He wouldn't pay me. When I got out of college,
he wouldn't have paid you if you came back.
He wouldn't pay me. He wouldn't hire me.
That's pretty funny.
So I worked on the farm for nothing, and was glad to do it. I knew I was an only child. I knew I was going to get it. So I worked. I had a job. In fact, I had a good job. I did well. I did okay. But I also worked on the farm a lot. And then, of course, he reached the point that he had dementia and then later deceased. So I took over the farm. And I did not want to have, the day job I had, I was in management with a regional agricultural cooperative. And I hated every day of it, but I learned a lot. And I probably would not have been able to come home and do what I have been able to do had I not had that exposure. So I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, life happens for you, not to you. It's kind of, if you take the lessons that you learn, then anything can be a good thing. I got told this was the $1 million question by I played baseball in college, and we had a sports coach, like a mental coach, kind of come to us, and he said this is the $1 million question, and it's, what do you know now that you wish Will Harris knew when you were 24 years old, 25 years old?
Well, I need about a week to think about that.
It's a loaded question.
I was really committed to the industrial model of ag production, particularly cattle production. That's what my dad did. That's what I learned at the University of Georgia. That's what I came home and did, and I did well with it. I went back and looked. I paid taxes every year I farmed industrially. We weren't rich people, but I made money every year, and we lived comfortably. When I changed the way I farm, I started having. I learned what a loss carry forward is. That's an IRS term when you lose money. So, I wish I'd been able to play the game a little differently, not gone so far down the industrial side, and then had to loop so far back to where we are now.
Because you mentioned you were like if it said put 2 pounds, you're putting 4 type guy.
Oh yeah, I was. No, I'm not proud of this, but I really, in my mind, label rates or label dosages were just a starting point. If If it said 2 cc's per 100, that meant 4. And then if it said put a pint to the acre, I thought it was a quart. Yeah. And I just, I don't know exactly where that mindset came from, but it worked for me. I mean, I was, I made money in those businesses.
The last question, I like to finish conversations with this because, as I mentioned right before this, Tyro experience is the name of the podcast. Tyro means novice or beginner. It stems from the Latin word meaning young soldier. And if I were to describe you as a Tyro, you might be surprised if I say young soldier. But I really do believe that I want to die a Tyro. I want to die a young soldier, a novice, a beginner in something, in some way, because that would be indicative of the fact that I'm continually learning. But to me, the way I perceive it is a Tyro is somebody that's in an arena. I think we're all in an arena, whether we know it or not, but we're in a specific arena. And a Tyro is somebody that's in that arena and they're picking up their sword, they're running towards the middle, and they're fighting for whatever that is. So my question to you is, at this stage in your life, having done the things that you've done, built the business and the community that you've built, what is it that you're fighting for?
For me, this is a generational business. One of the things that I learned in my time in big ag, in industrial big ag, is that it's the monthly report, the quarterly report, the annual report. And the annual report's about as long a term as we focused on. Here, it's a very generational business. We make decisions here at this table every day, at least every week, probably every day, that are literally generational. And we're going to invest in this piece of land, piece of equipment, the flock, herd, drove, and we will not make money on it. In fact, it'll cost us money to do that for the month and the quarter and the year and probably the decade. But generationally, it's the thing to do.
So it's a generational fight.
Generational, like from.
Well, I'm saying it's a generational fight for you. It's like you're fighting not for the year, not for the annual term to be profitable, but like so that sixth picture gets filled one day.
Exactly.
That's awesome. That's incredible. Well, Will, I thank you so much. This really has been a phenomenal experience. Getting to drive around White Oak Pastures with you I really do mean it. It's something that I would have never guessed that I would have been doing 2 years ago when I started buying your products. I'm a massive advocate of, I probably have like 20 pounds of beef liver in the fridge at home, or the freezer at home. The beef tongue, that's another thing. I absolutely love beef tongue.
Lingua.
Yeah. It surprises everybody. I give it to people and they're like, this is one of the tastiest things I ever had.
Yeah. That's incredible.
So I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for what you're doing at White Oak. This has been a real honor.
Well, thank you very much for your interest, and it's in the hands of young people like you.
Hopefully good ones, hopefully good hands. We'll do our best, but I appreciate it. Will, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And with that, I hope y'all enjoyed the conversation with Will. Man, that was hard to believe, honestly. That just the overall experience, getting to ride around with Mr. Harris on White Oak Pastures, learn about the ranch, see his level of knowledge and passion for what he's doing, his level of care that he takes for the land, the animal, and the people of Bluffton. And it was also just cool to hear him talk about his experience as an industrial farmer and the change that he made to Regenerative, hearing about his trials and tribulations that he faced during that process, what he held true to, how it's impacted his family, his community, and the nation, what his goals and mission are. Really just a profound conversation. I'm very grateful to have been able to spend some time with him and his family. I hope y'all enjoy this conversation. Until next time, stand firm.